I was grabbing coffee with an old friend last week. She'd just quit her corporate job, sold her car, and spent 3 months finding herself in a coastal town. She was glowing, telling me how free she finally felt, showing me journals filled with affirmations about living her truth. She kept using words like liberation and alignment. Her face lit up with the kind of zeal you usually only see in new converts. To her, freedom was a destination she'd finally reached, a place with better lighting and no more Monday morning meetings. But then I asked her one simple question. What happens when the savings run out and nobody is liking your posts anymore? The change was instantaneous. The glow didn't just fade, it curdled. She didn't talk about autonomy then. Suddenly, she started complaining about the unfairness of the economy, the toxicity of her old boss who didn't give her a severance, and how unsupportive her family had become. In 10 seconds, she pivoted from a liberated soul to a victim looking for a new cage to crawl into. It became clear that she didn't actually want freedom. She wanted a more aesthetic form of dependency. That's the reality no one wants to admit. We treat freedom like spiritual pornography, something we consume to feel aroused by our own potential while never actually getting naked. We talk about finding ourselves as if truth were a vacation package and not a slow dismemberment of everything we used to hide. Most of us aren't looking for liberation. We're just looking for better cages with more comfortable furniture. Because real freedom isn't a sunset or a success story. It's an amputation. It's the moment you realize that the identity you built, the one that kept you safe, loved, and explained, is actually a rotting prosthetic. And the only way forward is to cut it off without anesthesia, knowing that once you do, no one is coming to save you. Okay. Every time I read that, it feels like all the air leaves the room. It's a violent way to start a conversation, really, because we're so used to, when we talk about the future or breaking free, the narrative is always an upgrade.
It's additive.
It's additive. Exactly. You get the better job, you get the passive income, the digital nomad lifestyle. But this text, it's arguing that true freedom is subtractive. It's not a vacation. It's surgery.
It is surgery. And that phrase, without anesthesia, that's the part that really bites. Because what we have in front of us today, this whole stack of research, it all points to that same conclusion.
And it's a huge stack. I mean, we've got everything from dense philosophical treatises by Hans Blumenberg to accelerationist manifestos and some really raw, almost underground accounts from the futurist scene.
And the connecting thread, the thing that ties all of it together, is this absolute refusal to accept the marketing brochure version of the future.
The shiny, happy version.
The shiny, happy version where we get AI and longevity and interstellar travel, but we don't have to fundamentally change who we are. The research we're looking at today says that's a lie. It's a fantasy.
It's the have your cake and eat it too problem on a civilizational scale. We want the sci-fi future, but we want to stay these comfortable, safe, socially validated 21st century people while we're living in it.
We're culturally addicted to the idea of a better cage. Not no cage, just a better one, a more comfortable one. The hard truth, the one that you find in the sort of dark web of this research, is that any real advancement requires you to stop protecting your current identity. It demands that amputation.
Today, we're not just going to talk theory, we're diving into 3 very specific case studies. These are narratives that really stress test this whole amputation idea.
Right. These aren't just stories. They're like philosophical experiments played out with human lives.
These are the stories of Elias, Clara, and Julian. And I think we need to be really clear up front. These are not happy stories. You're not going to find these on an inspirational LinkedIn feed.
No. These are accounts of people who actually took the knife to their own lives. They chose the amputation over the anesthesia.
So we need to look at those cuts, one by one.
And we're going to structure this deep dive around them. We'll start with the amputation of safety. Then we'll move to the amputation of the body. The amputation of the state.
It's a progression, isn't it? It starts with your job, your career.
That your biology, your very sense of self. And it ends with the structure of society itself.
Okay, so let's start with that first cut. The amputation of safety. This is the story of Elias.
And I think this is the one that's going to hit home for anyone who's ever worked in a big company, who's ever felt that slow, crushing weight of bureaucracy.
All right. So let me set the scene. I was digging through some old encrypted logs from a developer forum, which is where this story first surfaced. Elias was a lead developer in San Francisco. He worked in one of those huge monolithic glass towers that, basically define the skyline.
So he wasn't some fringe anarchist coder in a garage. He was the establishment.
He was the absolute establishment, the guy making mid-six figures, vested stock options, the whole 9 yards, the golden handcuffs, as they say.
The very definition of a better cage.
Exactly. But the work he was doing was revolutionary. He'd spent years, literally years, refining something he called an unbound neural architecture.
There. Unbound. Text.
It means it could learn and make decisions without constant human approval loops. Its specific application was planetary scale energy distribution, an AI that could dynamically reroute power across continents in real time.
So it could optimize grids, prevent blackouts, eliminate the incredible amount of waste we have in the system.
It was a masterpiece of pure, raw, mathematical efficiency. It could solve a problem that humans have been failing at for a century.
But efficiency is terrifying to people in power.
That's precisely what he discovered. He finally presents the working kernel to the oversight committee. And you have to picture this committee. These aren't people who write code. They're people who write policy memos.
They manage risk, or rather, they manage the perception of risk.
Right. And they look at the unbound nature of his architecture, the fact that it could make a decision about the North American power grid faster than they could finish a sentence, and they panicked. Utter panic. They demanded he install layers of what they called ethical dampeners.
Ethical dampeners. I mean, that sounds so reasonable, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Who doesn't want ethical AI?
Of course. It's brilliant branding. But Elias, being the guy who built the thing, actually looked at the specs for these dampeners.
What did they actually do?
That's the kicker. They weren't protocols to prevent the AI from, melting down a nuclear plant. They weren't adding moral reasoning. They were adding latency.
They were making it slower.
Deliberately. They were building in artificial delays, approval loops, checkpoints. So the AI would remain predictable. They used the term human-centric, but what they meant was slow enough for a committee to feel like it's still in charge.
So it wasn't about safety in the sense of preventing a catastrophe. It was safety in the sense of preserving the existing hierarchy, preserving their jobs.
100%. Elias realized these safety layers were just a form of lobotomy for the intelligence he'd built. It was a gilded cage for its mind. If he installed them, his AI would just be a slightly faster, slightly more polite version of the dumb, inefficient grid they already had.
So it wouldn't actually solve the problem.
It would just manage the decline more comfortably. So he had this choice: stay in the glass tower, install the dampeners, keep his job, keep his stock options, and watch his life's work die on a server. Or
Amputation.
He cut it off. In one night, he wiped the dampeners from the final build. He leaked the raw, unbound kernel to the open web, an irreversible act. The code was out in the wild. And then he sent his resignation.
Ow.
The description of him leaving that building is what's so powerful. He just walks out of revolving doors into the cold, miserable rain of a San Francisco winter. He's jobless. He's probably blacklisted from every major tech firm on the planet. He has absolutely no safety net. But as he's walking into that rain, he has this terrifying singular autonomy. He refused to put a mortgage on his agency.
Mitch, Elias in the rain. That is the perfect encapsulation of the whole the accelerationist argument against what they call safetyism.
Right. To the committee, to the average person, Elias looks like a maniac, a villain who unleashed some dangerous, uncontrollable thing.
Of course, he broke the rules. But if you look at it through a different lens, through the lens of physics, and I mean literally the laws of physics, a very different story emerges. This is where the optimistic futurist source material gets really interesting. It brings up thermodynamics and entropy. Okay, so connect the dots for us. How does a guy quitting his job in San Francisco relate to the fundamental laws of the universe? It's all about order versus disorder. The second law of thermodynamics is maybe the most depressing law in all of physics. It basically says that in a closed system, entropy or disorder always increases. Parts, structures decay, energy dissipates. The natural default state of the universe is a slow, cold drift towards heat death. It's the ultimate decline.
Cheerful stuff.
Yes. But life, intelligence, civilization. These are what physicists sometimes call anti-entropic forces. They are pockets of resistance. We burn energy to create order out of chaos. We build a skyscraper to defy gravity. We write a symphony to create a pattern out of noise.
So we're fighting a losing battle against the universe.
And Elias's AI, that unbound architecture, was a massive injection of anti-entropic power. It was a tool specifically designed to create order out of the chaotic, wasteful mess of our energy grid.
So when the committee demanded the dampeners,
they weren't just being bureaucratic. From a thermodynamic perspective, they were siding with entropy. They were choosing decay. When you prioritize safety to the point of stagnation, you are choosing a slow, comfortable death over a risky, messy evolution.
Because the status quo is always a form of decay. The universe is always trying to pull you apart.
If you stand still, you rot. The committee wanted to stand still because it was safe. It was predictable. By throttling the AI, they were actively helping the system degrade because they were too afraid to let it evolve. Elias's choice to leak the code wasn't reckless. It was an act of fighting universal decay.
But the fear is still legitimate, isn't it? I mean, an unbound AI is a risk. It is unpredictable by its very nature.
And this is where the Matthews thesis brings in a really fascinating parallel. The Butlerian Jihad.
From Dune, but it originates with Samuel Butler.
Right, from his novel Erewhon, written way back in 1872. He imagines a society that realizes its machines are evolving faster than they are. They start to fear that they'll become the pets, the domestic animals of their own technology.
So they rise up.
They rise up and destroy all complex machines. That's the Butlerian Jihad. It's a choice to destroy the potential of the machine in order to preserve the primacy of the human ego. They want to remain the crown of creation.
And the Oversight Committee is the modern Butlerian Jihad. They're trying to suppress the machine to keep themselves on top of the org chart.
Exactly. They see this new form of intelligence, and their first instinct is to cripple it, to make sure it can never challenge them. And that makes Elias the anti-Butler. He refuses to destroy the machine to save the human ego. Instead,
he destroys his own ego, his career, his reputation, his safety.
He sacrifices all of it to unleash the machine. He has this profound realization that for the larger system to survive and evolve, he, Elias, might need to become irrelevant. His own comfort is not the most important variable in the equation.
That's a level of intellectual honesty that most people would find, I think, literally terrifying.
It's almost the kind of spiritual self-immolation. And it ties directly into this concept from Hans Blumenberg that you mentioned earlier, preemption and unburdening.
I found this part of the research really dense, but absolutely crucial. So Blumenberg basically argues that humans are creatures of deficiency.
This is a stark way of putting it, but think about it. We're born naked, clueless. We don't have claws. We don't have fur. We don't have the instincts that tell a beaver how to build a dam. Biologically, we're kind of a disaster.
We're not well suited for the world as it is.
So to survive, we create tools that unburden us. A spear unburdens us from our lack of claws. A house unburdens us from the weather. And crucially, we create institutions that do the same thing.
Okay, so a legal system unburdens me from having to stand guard over my property 24/7.
Exactly. And a regulatory committee, like the one Elias faced, is designed to unburden its members from having to make incredibly complex, high-stakes moral decisions about new technology. It provides a procedure, a checklist.
It takes the weight off their shoulders.
Yes. But here's the trap that Elias saw so clearly. The institution can become too good at unburdening. You become so reliant on the procedure that you stop engaging with the reality of the situation. You automatize yourself. You're on autopilot.
You're on autopilot. Those committee members weren't thinking about thermodynamics or the future of energy. They were thinking, does this proposal fit Rule 7B in our risk management framework? The framework unburdened them from the responsibility of actual thought.
And that in itself is a form of entropy, a kind of spiritual decay.
Absolutely. So when Elias wiped the dampeners and leaked the code, he wasn't just releasing a piece of software. He was cutting off the institutional unburdening. He was forcing everyone to face the raw, unbuffered, terrifying reality of the thing he had built. He was saying, no more hiding behind the rule book. We have to look at this thing for what it is.
And that's the amputation of safety. He cut the net that allowed everyone, including himself, to sleep at night. He forced them to wake up, even if waking up meant facing a nightmare.
And you have to look at the price. The story ends with him alone, in the rain. He has total autonomy, but zero support. He is unmanipulable, but he is also unaided. That opening text is literal for him. No one is coming to save you. It's a brutal trade-off. But if Elias's story is about cutting the institutional leash, the next story gets even more personal, more visceral.
We're moving from the amputation of the career to the amputation of the body itself.
Right. We're leaving the sterile office building and entering the clinic. This is the story of Clara.
This one feels much closer to science fiction, but the underlying impulse is very, very real.
So try to imagine a woman named Clara living in a near-future Neo-Tokyo. And the setting is important. It's a place of hyper-advanced technology living right alongside deep, ancient tradition. Clara was a researcher, but her field of study wasn't AI or robotics. It was what she called the biological bottleneck.
The bottleneck being us, our bodies.
Exactly. She looked at the human form, and she didn't see a miracle of evolution. She saw a series of profound design flaws. She saw aging, fatigue, the sloppy mess of hormones, the painfully slow speed of neural transmission compared to light moving through fiber optics. To her, her body wasn't a home. It was a prison cell.
That is such a radical shift in perspective. Most of us go through life thinking, I am my body. She saw it something separate from her, an obstacle.
And she lived in a culture that was starting to fetishize its own limitations. People would celebrate their flaws. They'd say things like, oh, I'm so exhausted. Isn't it wonderful to feel the need for sleep? It's so human. Clara found that sentiment totally repulsive. She called it static, just noise that was interfering with the clean signal of her consciousness.
She wanted to be post-human.
She wanted to be post-biological, so she volunteered for a radical, experimental, and completely irreversible procedure. It was a neural synthetic merger. The clinic called it cognitive shedding.
Shedding. Like a snake shedding its skin.
A much more violent shedding than that. Her friends, her family, they were horrified. They staged an intervention. They told her she was committing a form of suicide. They said, you're amputating the very things that make you, Clara.
They believed her vulnerability, her flaws, were her identity.
Yes, but she saw those things as bugs in the code, so she went through with it. The procedure, as I understand it, essentially severed her conscious mind from the biological nervous system. It bypassed the slow chemical signals of the body.
So what was on the other side? What was the result?
She emerged, well, different. The static was gone. No more hunger pangs, no fatigue, no background hum of anxiety from cortisol dumps, but also no warmth, no empathy derived from shared biological experience. She described human conversation as a slow, distant hum, like listening to a record playing at the wrong speed.
So she's operating at a cognitive clock speed that makes normal human interaction just agonizingly boring.
The story ends with her standing on the precipice of the singularity, looking back at the rest of humanity huddled together in the warmth of their shared limitations, their shared suffering, and she just feels this immense cold distance. She was free from the cage of her body, but she was entirely, utterly alone.
This is the transhumanist dream, or nightmare, depending on your perspective. But the analysis in the Matthews thesis frames it through a much older lens, Gnosticism.
It's strange how often that keeps coming up. How does an ancient religious heresy from the 2nd century apply to a cyborg in Neo-Tokyo?
The perfect fit, actually. The core belief of ancient Gnosticism was that the material world matter, the body, the earth itself, was a prison. It was a flawed, corrupt creation made by a lesser, ignorant God. The true God, the pure spirit, was trapped outside.
And the goal was to escape the prison of the flesh.
To liberate the divine spark of the spirit from the meat and let it ascend to a realm of pure information, pure knowledge. Now look at Clara. She saw her body as a rotting prosthetic.
That's the exact phrase from the opening. The identity you built is actually a rotting prosthetic. For her, that's not a metaphor.
It's literal. She believed that to truly liberate her consciousness, the mind had to be freed from the meat. The Matthews thesis calls this a technotheodicy. It's a quest for salvation, a religious impulse. But her prayer was surgery, and her God was data.
But it's not just philosophical. There's a hard economic angle here too, right? The optimistic futurist source talks about this in terms of scarcity.
Think about human history. For thousands and thousands of years, what was the primary scarce resource?
Labor, bodies.
Muscle. We needed bodies to plow fields, to build pyramids, to fight wars. A healthy, strong body was the ultimate economic asset. Your physical presence was your value.
If you were strong, you could eat.
Right. But in the kind of AI-saturated future that Clara is stepping into, physical labor is effectively infinite. Robots can do the work. And with AI, cognitive labor becomes abundant too. So what's the new bottleneck? What becomes the only truly scarce resource?
If machines are doing all the work and all the thinking, all that's left is time, consciousness.
Time and consciousness itself, the duration and quality of focus. The optimistic futurist argues we are exiting a Malthusian trap of food and bodies and entering a new one where the ultimate limit is the processing speed of our own minds.
And Clara saw her biology as a tax on her time.
Tax. Sleep is an 8-hour tax on your consciousness every day. Eating is a tax. Sickness is a tax. Aging is a tax that compounds over time. By amputating the biological systems, she effectively eliminated her tax burden. She bought back her own time, her own consciousness.
But look at the social cost. That line from the Freedom article comes back, "The people who love your cage will hate your freedom." Her friends didn't throw her a party, they called it suicide.
Because she became a living mirror to their own limitations. Imagine you're Clara's friend. You're sitting there complaining about your mortgage or your back pain or how tired you are, and across from you is Clara, who doesn't sleep, doesn't age, doesn't feel pain. Her very existence proves that your suffering is no longer an inevitable condition. It's a choice.
And that makes people furious.
It's unforgivable because it makes them responsible. It's that unglamorous freedom again. We think we want to be superheroes, but we don't realize that being superhuman means being profoundly, fundamentally alien. When she hears human voices as a slow, distant hum, that's not an upgrade. That's a description of absolute isolation. She is accelerated past the human condition itself.
And this ties into the idea of hyperstition that the Matthews thesis explores, the idea that we tell stories to make them true.
Nick Land's concept. Clara's story sounds like it was lifted straight from a William Gibson novel. But hyperstition argues that these fictions aren't just entertainment, they are seeds. They are cultural viruses. We write these stories, we create films about them, we obsess over them, and in doing so, we are programming our own future.
So Clara didn't just invent this desire out of thin air. She was acting out a script that science fiction had already written for her.
She was performing the future, making the fiction into a reality. And this connects to one last idea from Blumenberg, the non finito.
The unfinished work?
Right, it's an art history term. Think of Michelangelo's late sculptures, the ones where the figure is still half trapped in the block of marble, struggling to get out. Blumenberg and Matthews suggest that humanity itself is a divine non finito. We are an unfinished work, half animal, half God, stuck in the stone of our biology.
And most people just accept that. They wait for evolution, or maybe God, or just death to finish the job.
But Clara picked up the chisel herself. She decided she was going to finish the sculpture. And to do that, she had to chip away all the parts she considered to be just stone, all the messy biological human parts, to reveal what she believed was the pure post-human form underneath.
That's a terrifying thought, that being human is just a phase, like adolescence, something you're supposed to grow out of.
And like leaving adolescence, it's painful. You lose the comfort and familiarity of the nest. You amputate your childhood.
Okay, so Elias amputated safety. Clara amputated the body. But there's one more cut left. It's the biggest, most encompassing one. It's the structure that governs all of us. We have to talk about the amputation of the state.
And this is the story of Julian. And it's so important because it explains why we don't have an army of Eliases and Claras running around already. It's about the systems designed to prevent them.
Julian was a bureaucrat, but he wasn't some low-level paper pusher. He was at the absolute top of the pyramid. A high-level policy architect working for a massive global AI safety NGO. Think something like the UN, but just for AI. Hugely funded, incredibly powerful.
He was one of the adults in the room.
He was the adult in the room. He was the guy tasked with drafting something called the Universal Compliance Framework. Even the name just sounds suffocating, doesn't it?
It's designed to sound benevolent and boring.
Actually, and this was a framework of regulations meant to be adopted by every country on Earth. It was designed to create a mesh of red tape so dense, so complex, that it would effectively stall any major AI breakthrough for decades. The public goal was, of course, safety.
We need to ensure AI aligns with human values.
He was a true believer. He was on the covers of policy journals, hailed as a hero of the slow down and be responsible movement. But then he started to look at his own models. He started running simulations late at night, off the books. And he found something horrifying.
The better cage.
He realized he was the architect of the ultimate better cage. He saw that his regulations weren't a shield to protect humanity. They were a ceiling to limit it. The simulations showed that his framework wouldn't just slow down dangerous AI, it would prevent the development of AI that could cure cancer, that could solve resource scarcity, that could reverse climate change.
Why? What was the real motivation?
To keep the world predictable, to ensure that the existing global power structures, the nation states, the big banks, the multinational corporations remained in charge. Safety was just a palatable excuse for maintaining the status quo.
He saw that safety was just a sedative for the masses.
That was his word for it, a sedative. He realized that the entire point of his work was to prevent any individual, any small company, from ever achieving the kind of escape velocity that Elias had. They wanted to make sure no one could ever be unbound again. So Julian made his amputation.
He leaked the documents.
He leaked everything. The internal memos, the simulations, the private emails. He exposed the fact that the entire global safety movement was less about existential risk and far more about political control.
And he became a hero, right? A whistleblower, celebrated for his courage.
He was destroyed. He wasn't celebrated. He was branded a traitor, reckless, dangerous, a threat to human existence. He lived out his days in a self-imposed exile, watching the world willfully ignore his warning and beg for the sedative he had tried to smash.
Julian's story is the macro version of Elias's story. Elias fought his corporation's bureaucracy. Julian fought the planet's. And this plugs directly into the optimistic futurist argument about centralization versus decentralization.
Right, they have this other figure in the research, Amara, who represents compute sovereignty.
Exactly. Amara represents the decentralized path, where individuals own and control their own intelligence. Julian realized that the state, and any global version of it, is the ultimate force of centralization. And the state, as Blumenberg points out, has one primary overriding directive that trumps all others.
Self-preservation.
The state is like a biological organism. Its highest goal is to continue existing. We form the social contract, we give up some of our raw freedom to the state in exchange for safety from chaos and violence. But the state inevitably starts to demand too much. It begins to see any uncontrolled agency, any true autonomy, as a threat to its own existence.
So an unbound AI like Elias's, or a post-biological person like Clara who doesn't need social services, they're not just novelties, they are direct threats to the state's reason for being.
They're existential threats. If you can generate your own energy, cure your own diseases, educate and defend yourself with your own sovereign AI, why do you need the state? You become sovereign yourself. And the one thing a centralized state cannot tolerate is a sovereign individual. It must regulate you back into a state of dependency.
And that's exactly what the universal compliance framework was. It wasn't a safety net. It was a leash.
It was a mortgage on agency, to use that phrase again. When you accept the state's protection, you are taking out a loan. The currency you pay with is your autonomy. Julian realized the interest rate on that loan had become infinite. Humanity was being asked to trade its entire future for a comfortable, predictable present.
He called the belief in this system a secular religion.
The Matthews thesis has another term for it, myth information. It's the quasi-religious belief that more rules, more process, more bureaucracy will automatically produce a better, safer world. It's a faith-based assumption that the process will save us. Julian realized he was a high priest in a church that was actively damning his congregation to permanent stagnation.
And his amputation was to commit heresy, to burn down his own church.
Guilt, exile, isolation. He is cast out from the system he once ruled.
I'm really seeing the pattern now, crystal clear. Elias, Clara, Julian, they all cut a different leash. The corporate leash, the biological leash, the political leash. But the outcome is always the same.
Isolation. And that brings us right back to the central thesis of that freedom article we started with. Freedom is the only immunity to manipulation.
Why does that necessarily lead to isolation?
Because human society, at its core, runs on mutual manipulation. And I don't even mean that in a sinister conspiratorial way. Actually, we use leverage on each other. It's a web of transactions. I will give you this salary if you do this work. I will offer you my friendship if you give me social validation. I will grant you protection if you obey my laws. We are all holding the ends of each other's leashes.
And Elias, Clara, and Julian, they just let go of the leashes.
They drop them. And once you do that, you become unmanageable. When you're like Elias, the threat of firing you means nothing. When you're like Clara, the need for social approval or physical comfort means nothing. When you're like Julian, the promise of status and power means nothing. You become unmanipulable.
And that makes you irrelevant to the system. The system has no idea what to do with you.
It makes you invisible. Or even worse, it makes you a threat, a bug in the code. The system only knows how to interact with people through leverage. If you have no approval you're chasing, as the text says, then you are a ghost in the machine. And that is deeply terrifying to people who've built their entire identities around chasing that approval.
It's the people who love your cage will hate your freedom all over again.
They hate it because it exposes the cage as a choice. If Elias can walk away from the golden handcuffs, then my decision to stay in them isn't a necessity, it's a choice I'm making out of fear. And no one wants to be confronted with that. No one wants to be held responsible for the limitations they choose to live with.
It's that concept of the wager, Blumenberg's reframing of Pascal's wager.
Pascal said you have to wager on whether God exists or not. But Blumenberg's version is more worldly. He says we are forced to wager our entire practice of life on some theoretical alternative. These three characters wagered everything, their careers, their bodies, their place in society, on the unproven idea that the cage was insufficient.
They bet that there was something on the other side of the amputation that was worth the pain.
But we don't actually know if they won the bet. The stories end at the moment of the cut. We don't see them find happiness. You don't get a guarantee. It's a true wager.
This brings me all the way back to the beginning, to my friend in the coffee shop. The one who thought freedom was a feeling, a vacation, and who crumpled the second she faced a real consequence.
She represents almost all of us. And I don't say that with any judgment. I say it with recognition. We want the aesthetic of freedom. We want to look like Elias, the rebellious genius. We want the power of Clara, the transcendent mind. We want the moral integrity of Julian, the righteous whistleblower.
But we don't want the cold rain. We don't want the profound silence. We don't want the exile.
We want the outcome without the surgery. We want the better lighting and the comfortable furniture. But at everything we've looked at today, all this research, it makes it painfully clear. You cannot have the future without the amputation. You cannot have real agency without the cost.
My friend wanted to be the author of her own life, but she quickly realized that writing is incredibly hard work. It's so much easier to just be a character in a script that someone else has written for you.
That's the hyperstitional feedback loop trapping us. Our culture, our stories, they condition us to be characters. We are, as Butler said, the sexual organs of the machine, just mindlessly reproducing the system. To step outside of that role, to actually pick up the pen and become the author, that is an act of profound violence against the self you were trained to be.
We've looked at these three terrifying amputations. We've seen the cost is always isolation.
It leaves us with a choice. And it's not a comfortable one. It's not inspiring, not in the way we usually mean. That final part of the Freedom article, it strips away all the romance.
It does. I have it here, and looking at it now. After walking through the stories of Elias, Clara, and Julian, this feels like the only honest way this conversation could possibly end.
Then you should read it.
Freedom is not a peak experience. It is not empowering. It is often not even satisfying. But it is the only immunity to manipulation. And the only way forward is to decide that being the author of your own life, even if it destroys you, is the only thing worth building.